Welcome to Connections and Conversations, an advocacy arena podcast, working to increase civic engagement and strengthen our communities. Hello, welcome to Connections and Conversations. I'm so excited to be here with I'm going to call him a good friend, even though we met on social media, but we are very like-minded and we have a similar passion around education. And I am so thrilled that I have an opportunity to talk to him today. So I want to give you a chance to get to meet him and have him introduce himself. So hello, Stephen. Would you just tell people a little bit about yourself, who you are?
Sure. Hello, Dee, and it's a thrill to be with you and in community here. I would say it's an honor, but I know because of the company I'm in and your guests, but I know that your intention is not to create any honor, but just to lift up the regular people who are doing the hard work of justice, really, and equity work. I'm an educator. I'm a dad. I'm a lifelong New Yorker, and I'm living in pursuit of liberty and justice for all. That's pretty much what I'm about.
I love it. So we're here today to talk about education, a subject that both of us are passionate about. And I want you to just give us a little bit of your background in education.
Sure. I became a teacher almost by accident, almost 30 years ago. I was going to be a psychiatrist. That was my plan. Growing up in New York City, I had seen the divide between the haves and the have-nots right up close throughout my childhood and adolescence. And I thought, I could study the human brain and why things are the way they are. And I thought, let me do Teach for America for a couple of years, and I'll go find out if the schools are as bad as I've heard they are in some neighborhoods in New York. And then I can get a little real world experience before I go do what I really want to do, which is the ivory tower. And I realized that real world experience was what I really wanted to do, because being with people, the real community members who are now friends and colleagues all these years later, that's where the work is. The interest I had in finding out why things are the way they are and how they could be different can be found in every school community and every classroom.
So what is it that you're doing in education at the moment? Because I know, like you said, you've had a long history, so probably a winding path like many, but what are you currently doing around education?
Right now, I'm working as a senior education consultant for a nonprofit called Teaching Matters that works nationally, but mostly in New York City. And I am coaching in schools. So I work with a select group of teachers that's chosen by the school leader on all 5 boroughs of New York City. So the principal has a project that he creates with this nonprofit, and they bring me in to support the teachers in setting goals. And I do demonstration lessons, or I bring information and listen to them and do a lot of sometimes hand-holding and sometimes directing, but mostly it's collaborative listening and learning together alongside the professional. And I'm mostly coaching in 2 areas. One is there's a reading shift here in New York City, which is very controversial and is making a lot of people upset, and also has a lot of great things about it, which is called New York City Reads. And it's embracing the science of reading, which some states in the South have been doing for a long time and have seen success. And now more states are taking on this language of science of reading, but it's diving deep into it as a coach. I found that it's both more simple in some ways and more complex than people have been treating it. So I can talk about that if that's of interest. And the second thing I'm doing is coaching in restorative justice work in schools. So there is a state framework that came out right before the pandemic called Culturally Responsive and Sustaining Education. It's a big, hefty document about what school communities can do to be more culturally relevant, build better relationships with families, and create a more welcoming and affirming environment for students. And it's sort of been under the radar because COVID happened right after that and all these curriculum reforms. So schools work with me and the New York City Department of Education to help their teachers understand this framework and use it as a lens to view their work and make their environments more restorative for students.
That is awesome. Both seem to be very relevant and very important areas of education. The reading one really touches me because I am an avid reader, have been all my life. I'm struggling a little bit now because the eyes are getting bad and all of this stuff, from all the screen stuff. But I still do it. And, now we have Audible and things like that. But also because my experience with my children dealing with really bright people, but having difficulty reading because of like dyslexia and other things like that, and how schools address or don't address those issues. What's been your experience around those kinds of things? And just kind of tell me, I might be coming in at the middle of this, but tell me a little bit about this program around reading.
Well, schools don't do enough to address dyslexia. First of all, something like 20% of people in America are dyslexic, and most of it's undiagnosed. That may be a low estimate. And dyslexia means a lot of different things, but essentially it comes down to having difficulty decoding and taking that information that's on the page and turning it into speech and into sounds, understanding the different types of sounds in the English language in particular, which is really difficult to parse, and turning that all into the reading experience. And the New York City Reads program doesn't address dyslexia, although there is a separate push in the city to do more, and New York State to do more to support students with dyslexia.
Okay.
But the New York City Reads program is supposed to be about the science of reading, which covers 5 areas of classroom learning. 2 of those 5 areas are about phonics. One is decoding, and the other is phonemic awareness, which is the ability to distinguish different sounds within a word. And the other 3 are more in the domain of how traditionally reading has been taught outside of phonics. So it's comprehension, vocabulary, and fluency, but there are specific things within those that teachers need to do and know in order to do this work well. And so the city's approach has been what I think is a bit of a shortcut. I'm being critical, but I'm aware that it's a system of 1 million children. If you want to make change happen fast, you've got to take some shortcuts. So I understand the impulse to just throw resources and say, now figure out how to do it, and here's a coach and they'll help you, versus the years-long work that real sustainable change takes. What I'd like to see is a 10-year plan to roll out the knowledge behind this research and see teachers gradually implement these tools and become masters and instructional leaders within their classrooms. And then the curriculum almost doesn't matter. A great teacher who understands the science of reading can teach reading with very little resource, very little instruction or support, because they know what experiences the kids need, and they can create that learning community that is really a part of the Black pedagogical tradition that has been lost, at least in New York City, in my experience.
That makes a lot of sense. I know, again, like I said, for me, reading was always like a passion, kind of escape growing up in, a small southern rural town. Reading brought the world to me. It helped me to imagine other places. And I want the people in my life and people that I know to have that same experience, because I do think there is a lot of power in that. Can you talk a little bit about your experience in this coaching effort, like maybe some of the highlights and some low points in trying to get this work and this project implemented?
Personally, the main highlight has been seeing so many different school communities and learning from different school leaders and teachers and being in classrooms and seeing so many different approaches that all sort of fit together in a big puzzle here in New York. But a low light has been to affirm what I already knew, which is how important leadership is. And if leadership isn't aligned, then no citywide effort, no, magic curriculum is going to make a difference. So I'm coaching in schools that are one subway stop apart. That's half a mile in the same communities, with a night and day school culture and a night and day level of focus and coherence among the teachers. And you can see the results in how the students are learning and even how they're carrying themselves, how they approach their learning. A big lesson is, it's not new. People know this, but I think a theme of my time in education has been that we are not applying things we know well, but we know that leadership matters and that school culture matters. And leaders can cultivate a coherent direction, a coherent vision for the school community that can make sure everyone succeeds. So being specific, if you don't have a strong research-backed sequential multisensory phonics program in place beginning in early childhood that goes all the way up to 3rd grade, when the expectation is now students are reading and they're reading to learn rather than learning to read, then you're not going to get the results you want, and you're leaving a lot to chance. There used to be this battle when I started teaching in the 90s between whole language and phonics. Is phonics needed, or will kids just learn to read naturally? And I think that the research is clear. You need both. You need phonics because you cannot count on kids to just automatically learn how to decode. You don't know what their family's background might be or what's happening at home. Some families have the resources and time and knowledge to supplement what's happening by doing basically tutoring at home with their children beginning at a very young age. My mom, who's an immigrant, told me that Sesame Street taught me how to read. I don't think that's true, but I watched a lot of Sesame Street. That is a phenomenon, of course. But you also need that rich learning community, and you need a chance for students to develop knowledge by becoming little researchers and studying their communities, their classroom, their school, the things they care about, and things that are foreign to them. So beginning at a young age, young children are able to internalize a lot of vocabulary and knowledge by being pushed to examine whether it's world events or world cultures or their own backyard in miniature and recreate. And that really supports reading instruction. Schools that don't do that are not following the science of reading, and they're taking a chance.
I totally get that. I have a granddaughter, and we're here in the South where they just instituted some new laws around, like that third grade level, them testing. If they don't meet the guidelines, then they're held back. And she was also one of the unfortunate group of kids who started kindergarten during the pandemic. So she did kindergarten virtually. She and most of the kids who that happened to, kind of missed some things. And she is coming along. We've gotten her a tutor and we're doing things. And of course, I try to help her here. Like you said, that environment can make a difference because I saw her go at different times across the spectrum of like, I don't know, I don't want to know, this is boring, it's hard, and these kinds of things. When you encounter those kinds of things, because I know right now you're not dealing with students per se, you're dealing with teachers. What kind of thing do you encourage teachers to do, or what kind of tools and resources do you provide to them, guidance to kind of overcome some of these things? Because, like, my granddaughter is so bright. I know that, she's mine, but there are millions like her across the country who are probably in the same kind of similar situation.
Yeah. The most universal answer is data. What data do educators have about their students? Two things. I mean, their performance, their knowledge. So in kindergarten, pre-K, literally what letters can they identify? What sounds can they make on demand? What level of reading can they take on? Can they read what we call CVC words like cat, dog that has a consonant, vowel, and consonant? That's one level of data. If you have clear data, you have a clear follow-up to implement to support children. And the other piece of data is knowledge about the family and about the child. A lot of educators, because of the kind of Frankenstein method of adding all these programs and reform, their heads are spinning and they don't even know where to start. And they're not making time for the most important part of a classroom, which is building that community of trust and love and care, which also extends to knowing the families you work with. So do teachers even know that your granddaughter has a tutor? They probably do, given what I know about you. But
yes,
is the teacher proactive enough to work with the family and get to know the family at a deeper level than the surface things that teachers are expected to do, which is send home notices and so on and so forth. I want to see a community school where educators are opening up boundaries, visiting families' homes, sitting on their couch. Those conversations have been some of the most powerful learning experiences for myself as an educator and for the students I worked with. When you hear hopes and dreams and you understand the context of a family, where they came from and what they're trying to accomplish, everything gets so much bigger and little problems seem so small. And you start to realize that a child that you work with is really on a journey, a multi-generational journey. And the work becomes so much more important and invigorating and powerful. And our approach to school right now, which is very focused on the teacher role and the lesson plan and
the test and
all that stuff gets very small when you start to think about the big picture of it and where we're trying to go here. That's my big takeaway from almost 30 years as an educator. I said before, we're ignoring what we know. We knew this long before the 90s, but there was a book that came out in the 90s by the head of the Carnegie Corporation. It's called The Basic School. And he said there are 4 things that every school needs. And he came to this by visiting high-performing schools and school districts all over the country. And he said the four things are a strong learning community, a coherent approach in the building, a curriculum that makes sense to everybody, not like the best curriculum or the perfect curriculum, but a good enough curriculum, and a climate for learning that is supportive. And that was sort of revolutionary at the time. People didn't talk much about school culture in the 90s. It became a bigger buzzword in the 2000s and after the standards movement. But I think we don't still pay attention to those things. We don't talk about the climate for learning enough. We don't talk about the purpose of schooling enough. I think the purpose of schooling is to prepare children and their families to navigate the world and achieve their hopes and dreams and their basic skills. But there's more than basic skills too. And we don't really discuss that. We just kind of assume that we all know and mean the same thing when we say that school and education, we got these standards, we got these tests, we got college and career. But I don't think in our soul we have a coherent approach to what school is for. And it's an incredible resource that we're letting really just twist in the wind in a way without that direction and shared focused understanding.
I would agree with you absolutely on that. And I'm someone, as you said, they're going to know what's going on at home because I'm going to know what they're doing there. But in instances where you don't have families and parents who can be that involved, who even know that they should be involved, because I think kind of sometimes like with medicine, people go to doctors, they think they know everything. They just go and tell me what to do. You have all the answers, not recognizing that it really is a relationship and it's important. There's a give and take and an understanding I feel needs to be in place in both sides there. So how do you kind of help to mitigate that issue that exists?
I think my future work will be back in the school leadership realm. It's hard to avoid that because it was the best job I ever had. It was very challenging and, it was time to step and do something different. And I've learned a lot since. Now that I have more tools and a wider perspective, I think I can have an even bigger impact in my next role as a leader, maybe as a district leader in 10 years. I mean, who knows? The future is wide open. It's tough as a coach because my role is the best practice in my work is not to be directive to teachers. It's to bring out from them what the goals are and bring out for them what the knowledge that they already have is.
Mm-hmm.
I try to introduce frameworks that I think are relevant. And there are some, and they're very simple, pat almost sets of ideas that have come along to us along the generations and that I think are super applicable and depending on the situation that help shift educators and think differently about their work. So with adolescence, there is this Lakota tradition and there is some scholarship that has studied it about 4 things that young adults need to thrive. And this has mostly become a trauma response program called the Circle of Courage. And the 4 things are mastery, belonging, independence, and generosity.
Wow.
I'll say it again. Mastery, belonging, independence, and generosity.
I love that.
And when you see people at the secondary school level, middle and high school, rebelling and acting out, and the first question I have is, where are any of those 4 primal needs we all have not being met? And how can the school work with the family to make sure that those needs are met, whether it's at the school or outside the school building in the community? The lack of relationship between school and community that I see in a lot of places makes that really problematic. And that's where the assessment centers come in, because assessment centers connect schools with faith communities, with nonprofits, with government services, with all those institutions that have, formed around families that aren't always used well, or even people aren't even aware are there. Another one is that I would bring more at elementary school maybe is Dr. Goldie Muhammad is a writer and a researcher and educator. And she's come up with this, her own framework for literacy, which she calls the 5 pursuits. Which is every classroom should be organized around these 5 pursuits. And again, irrespective of standards, location, curriculum, whatever. But if you want literacy, you want these 5 things: identity, intellect, criticality, skills, and joy. And if the classroom teachers can cultivate these things, respect the identity of the students, celebrate it, affirm it, share it, bring it into the community, Intellect means you take the work really seriously and you hold your students in high regard. You challenge them to have high expectations. You're serious about your work. The criticality is I'm not stuffing you with knowledge. You're becoming an investigator. I'm giving you the ability to challenge yourself. You're asking questions and I'm taking them seriously. I'm stopping the lesson like a freight train if I hear something that is going to be generative from a student. You might hear a district say, no, the pacing calendar, you got to move on. No, stop everything, because authentic learning is spontaneous sometimes. And a teacher who appreciates criticality knows that. Skills speaks for itself. That goes back to phonics. Like, you're not going to get anywhere if you're not doing a little bit of that foundational work. And of course, joy, which I ran a charter school for a long time, and the charter sector has some benefits. But as you know, a lot of issues. One of the issues is artificial shortcuts to things. And there's this thing called joy factor in a lot of charter schools that makes my head shake because it's like, this is going to be really hard for the kids and they're going to hate it. So you make sure you have some joy factor. And are you kidding me? That's the wrong approach. If it's not already joyful, if you're not having fun, what are you doing? Learning is engaging, exciting. Learning is a thrill. So if your program requires you to not forget joy factor, so that's not Goldie Muhammad's point. Her point is learning is joyful and you need to recognize, articulate that, surface it, and celebrate it with the kids. To answer your question, I take these frameworks and, when I see things, sometimes the smallest moment will spark that conversation, be an entry point or something, a comment a teacher makes. I noticed that you're having a problem with this one child about X. And then I can say, have you heard of this framework? And then it becomes a more of a conversation and creates inquiry on the part of the teacher to develop the skill.
That's awesome. I love those things, and absolutely joy. Like, for me, that's one of the things, like my attitude in helping my children and other kids that I encounter. Because for a short period of time, I worked at some relatives of mine's had daycare centers and early learning centers. And what I loved about those young kids was the joy, like their literal joy of learning. And my premise, I'm not a trained teacher or anything, it's just my own experience, is when people love something, when there is joy there, you can give them a lot of information. They can absorb so much when they feel good about it, when there is joy surrounding it. And I always get a little concerned when I hear that kids don't like school, or that there's no joy there. And there was a period, I told you my granddaughter started during the pandemic, where, like in kindergarten, I could see some of that joy. I'm like, no, school's fun. It's fun. I know it's hard. It's hard. And we got it back. But that's really like important to me, because I feel like, if kids are curious and interested, like there's almost anything you can do, you can teach them. And when people are in a good place in their mind, you can pour a lot into them. So I kind of like that. I really have enjoyed getting to know some of your background, some of the things that you're doing. They sound really exciting. As we kind of start to wrap up a little bit, I want to talk about this new project that, you've kind of worked on and how it ties in to education, the assessment centers. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, so it started because when I took time off after leaving my school leadership role to recover from all the years of nonstop head down to the grindstone, I had time to do things I wouldn't have ordinarily done. And one of them was to follow up with some students who had been in trouble. Up night worrying about the kids who fell to the cracks and wondering how this could have happened. And in the course of being down in Lower Manhattan at the court, listening in to court cases, I learned about diversion for the first time. Diversion, for the listeners who don't know, is alternatives to sentencing for people who've been convicted of crimes or accused of crimes. And I thought, how can I, as an educator, not know what diversion is? Because I'm hearing the research that it's effective and helpful for young people. I started surveying other educators and school leaders. I found that a smattering of elementary school leaders knew about diversion. About half of the high school educators I knew, and almost none of the private school educators knew about diversion. So that got me thinking, it seems like this could be an avenue for making a difference, bringing this concept to educators. And as I learned about diversion, I found, wow, it's very much what good schools do. There's case management, there's relationship building, there's service learning, there's goal setting, and there's progress monitoring. We do that all the time, all those things. And then I entered a period of anger because I realized that this diversion work is all reactive. And again, we don't do things that we know. We know prevention is more effective than reaction. We know the warning signs of a disaffected child. We know that when we hear things, or they're not coming to school, or the families bring problems to our doorstep and say, I'm struggling with this. If we intervene now, why can't we do diversion before there's harm instead of after? If this works, I became despondent because I saw that lacking. And I realized that my circle was very small. And as I widened my lens outside of New York City, I did discover these programs called assessment centers that are happening in about 100 communities nationwide. And some of them are getting outstanding results, reducing youth justice encounters by massive amounts over time. In Memphis, 80% over 10 years. Preventing the trauma of detention for young people who are in trouble and giving them support instead. Providing the right resources at the right time and connecting people to community programs instead of to the systems that harm them, and following up to make sure that those community resources are helping, and then giving them more support if needed. And as I talk to people here in New York City in the fields of justice and law, I hear, well, we're too complicated here. It's too big, and there's too many turf wars, and it'll never happen. And I found that somewhat to be true, but I also see some initiatives happening at the community level in certain neighborhoods where there are efforts to bring educators, justice people, and community supports to the table to problem solve about individual student and family cases. As I visit schools and I talk to school leaders, and in my own experience, there's always that case that you just can't solve. There's always that family where you've tried everything and you just can't, whether it's the parent or the school, you just cannot crack the case of what the kids' needs are, and you need a different perspective. And most times, schools don't know what to do. I literally had a service agency in one of the schools where I was coaching. The person stopped me in the middle of a hallway, and this is a social worker who was just kind of placed in the school without the coordination I'm talking about. And she says to me, can you get the kids to stop saying the N-word to each other in class? And I'm thinking, why are you asking me this? I mean, first question is, why are they saying it? If they are, that might be appropriate, depending on who they are and what the context is. Why are you asking me? I'm a coach. I'm coaching teachers. Mm-hmm. Obviously, this person didn't have an outlet to collaborate in a true sense with the faculty and school leadership. So the idea of an assessment center, just like another one that I've heard of, which is called the Situation Table, which is starting in Brownsville, Brooklyn here, and comes from Toronto and Boston, actually. So there are places that are trying this. The idea is to create this coherent web of support and communication and collaboration, and to help children to develop properly and get the supports they need. So I care about this because I think it's a real missing piece in education. I think that school buildings need to, if they're going to prepare children and families to navigate the world, if they're going to build knowledge and help children to be confident and go out and to confront different environments and different neighborhoods,
right,
they need to do everything. They need to bring in everything. And that means they need to connect with what's already out there. So I think assessment centers provide that opportunity. I'd like to see them develop here in New York and everywhere. It just makes sense to save districts money and save counties money. And I'll say one more thing about it. In New York City, Rikers Island is famous for being dysfunctional and unsafe and traumatizing. There are currently 3,000, I want to say, it's 6,000 inmates on Rikers Island. And they are supposed to be held there for less than a year, but we know it extends beyond because the wheels of justice turn slowly. The cost to the taxpayer for traumatizing these inmates is between $250,000 and $500,000 per inmate per year. What if we put a portion of that money into prevention? And where are the kids? They're in school.
Yes.
The same people who are in Rikers right now, whether they're 45 years old or 16 years old, they were in someone's classroom at some point. They were a little 5-year-old, full of hope and promise, full of issues and problems that deserve attention and support and care and love. And now suddenly they're, treated in a very different way because they didn't develop in the way we want them to. They got off the track. Something happened, and something horrible has happened to them as well. I think we're asking very wrong questions when we're not saying, how on earth did we get here? And how are we going to make sure this next generation gets the love and care it needs and the support it needs so that they can stay on track and they can all achieve what Goldie Muhammad says we should have, what Carter G. Woodson expected young people to have 100 years ago, and what we want for our own kids.
Absolutely. I love this. When you told me a little bit about it and I watched a video that you shared with me, I thought, wow, this is amazing. And I didn't know that there was one in Memphis, and I'm glad. And so I want to continue talking to you about it because I know it's something that you're just kind of diving into and learning about. But I do see that as a very necessary part of things that are needed in our community that connect to education, because unfortunately, we also have the largest private prison here. And, that there is this school to prison pipeline didn't come about. It's real. And so these diversion programs and things that come up, I think that, we're smart people. And like you said, these kids are in school, they're in someone's classroom. And how can we prevent these things, like that pipeline from being flooded? How we save our kids, because they're our future. So I admire you for recognizing that and wanting to bring it into your community. And it's been so wonderful, talking to you about something that I am passionate about. I know that you're passionate about. And as we start to wrap up, I just wanted to ask, you to kind of share some closing thoughts around education, the assessment centers, some things that you would like people to take away from this conversation.
Two things. One, as I've gone around New York City to different schools, I have been so energized by so many positive things. And I think, I'm complaining a lot in this interview about things we don't do, but there's so much right in our schools. There are so many teachers who care and are focused, and kids learning, and, all of this talk about all the depression that we have and mental health needs of young people. And it's none of it I deny. But I think we're missing the forest for the trees, which is young people are resilient. And we've been through a lot before, and we've overcome it, and we will again. And we need that positive attitude and that can-do spirit. Again, going back to the Black pedagogical literary tradition, every single instance of Black educational advancement has been met with massive white supremacy backlash. And did people stop and give up? No, they kept going, and they rebuilt their schools that got burned down, or they reorganized, or they found secret ways to do things, or they did what Dr. Jarvis Givens calls fugitive pedagogy by hiding the textbook they really wanted to read and showing the officials the one they wanted to see. So I think that we will overcome the current challenges. I think we will get past this era of disinformation and know-nothingness, and we will build again, and young people will be okay. So that's the first thing I want to say. And the second thing is, I know your passion for history, and I think we all as Americans and all educators need to share that passion, because the answers are there. And what we need now in the 21st century is not different than what we needed in the past. And they didn't have screens in, the old days, and they survived. We need to put the screens away. We need to focus on what matters, those things about attachment to a caregiver, the support of a loving community, intergenerational learning. We can't forget that we evolved as a species over tens of thousands, maybe millions of years with those factors there. Historians know this, and they teach us, and we ignore them at our peril. So if we look back to the past, we can be resilient in the present.
I love it. Amazing conversation today. And I always enjoy talking to you because you talk about something that is very passionate to me, education. So I just want to thank you for spending a little time with me today to, discuss some of the things and share some of the things that you have learned in your career, educating kids and now coaching other leaders in that field. And I hope that you are able to get back to what you were doing and to do it differently, to be a leader with these newfound skills and ideas. So thanks again.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity. It's been a great conversation.
Likewise. Thank you for listening to Connections and Conversations. This is one of many wonderful interviews that we bring to you to help connect you to a larger community of advocates and change makers across the country. You'll get a glimpse into the various ways people are making an impact in their communities. My hope is that it will inspire you to get engaged in some small way as well. We can't all do everything, but at this moment in history, we can all do something. What are you doing? One of the things you can do is to continue to listen, subscribe, and share this Advocacy Arena podcast. You can also join and support the growing grassroots Advocacy Arena community in other ways. Join our weekly live chats hosted on Spoutable every Monday at 12 p.m. Eastern. Subscribe to our Substack to get great articles on important topics and exclusive access to extended interview conversations. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. We've got some exciting programming lined up. And keep listening to our regular podcast episodes wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, subscribe and give us that all-important 5-star review.